Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today. My name is Sean Courtney, and I'm the Marketing and Communications Officer at Connecting Up and TechSoup New Zealand. Our webinar today, Introduction to SharePoint, will be presented by Stephanie Kachayas, Senior ICT Advisor at Infoxchange. If you have a question during the webinar, please type it in the question box on your panel, and we will make some time at the end of the webinar to go through them. That's all from me, so I'll now hand over to Stephanie.
Thanks very much, Sean. Thanks everyone for joining us here today in the webinar. Bit of background on myself before we start. I've been working with SharePoint for about 5 years now in various roles. My background is actually in information management and just general business consulting, and sort of as one does in this industry, sort of finds themselves having to learn and use certain platforms, and had to learn and use SharePoint a little while ago, and have just developed lots of sort of generalist skills in it. I'm not a SharePoint developer. I'm not a specialist SharePoint consultant. I'm a bit more of a generalist, but I've got a lot of experience with implementing SharePoint intranets with non-for-profits now that I work at Infoxchange, which we're a non-for-profit ourselves, and we work with other non-for-profits in Australia and New Zealand. And yeah, so I help clients think about their information architecture and think about their document management and just in general their IT systems, and help them make decisions on how to implement it. And just a housekeeping note, there is a little bit of noise in the background here in this office that I'm in, unfortunately. So apologies if you hear a little bit of banging. They're doing some repair work behind me. So hopefully, I don't think it's too bad, but you might hear a little bit of noise. So just a heads up on that. So welcome to the session. Look, hopefully we'll be done we definitely will be done by the end, so that you can definitely ask questions with the chat box, and Sean will read them out to me at the end. If there's anything really urgent you really need to get me to stop, that's fine. Put a chat in and ask it, and if it's urgent, we'll stop it. But otherwise, we'll hold most questions to the end, and hopefully we'll be done. We'll definitely be done before the hour, and we might be able to finish a bit early, because I know an hour is a long time. And it's not a deep dive session. It's not a we've only got an hour, so we can't go into too much depth. This session assumes very little prior knowledge about SharePoint. It's really an introductory session to the product and to the platform, and just a general overview on what the sorts of things it can do. So I'll go over what it is as a platform, why you would use it in your organisation, some of the reasons why people would implement this platform, and give you some examples of what I'm talking about. I'll also quickly touch on a couple of alternatives and/or complementary systems that come with Office 365, and that often there's a little bit of confusion about what the difference between SharePoint and these things are, but also just in general thinking about why you would use one over the other. And then also just at the end, and what I think hopefully is the biggest takeaway from the session, is just if you're thinking about implementing SharePoint, what are the big points that I would suggest you do when you're thinking about going into a project like this one. So SharePoint's a very complex, comprehensive system that's been around for a long time, and there are a lot of organisations out there who spend a lot of money, building, customised portals for their business. And indeed, it's a powerful platform on which a lot can be built. This whole session really focuses on the more DIY end of the spectrum. It's aimed at non-for-profits who don't necessarily have big IT budgets, but definitely see the value in implementing something like this. And the good thing about SharePoint is it's the sort of thing you can build on over time. You don't have to start big. You don't have to go really overwhelmed, go for something really big when you go for it. You can just start playing with it. You can just start using it. But obviously there are things to think about in terms of strategy and why you want to use it, but you don't have to spend a lot of money, and you don't have to spend a lot of technical customization to get it to do things you want it to do. So that's really sort of the aim of the session, is to help you understand that and just sort of get a basic understanding of what it can do out of the box. Okay, so what is this platform? SharePoint is a system that organisations use to build secure websites that are internal, otherwise called intranets. It used to be kind of more of a big end of town thing. You used to have to buy a server product, like an Outlook server or like an email server or a file server. It needed a SQL server to sit alongside of it, and it was quite a big sort of infrastructure investment, as well as like obviously a processes and web front end investment. And it is still very popular and widely used as an intranet for big organisations. I'm talking things like places like Telstra and the big bank NAB and big mining companies and things like that use them. I used to run one at a mid-sized consulting firm, and that was a server product. And yeah, so it obviously used to take a lot of investment, both in sort of just hardware and software, but in management of it as well, and maintenance and upkeep of that. But now it's available online, called SharePoint Online, as part of the Office 365 suite. Now, that means to get it, you need to be an Office 365 subscriber. You have to have an Office 365 account. And you need a web browser and the internet. So it can be accessed via any web browser, and you just log in. It's a web application now. There's no hosted server that you host. It's hosted in Microsoft's cloud offering, which is Office 365, and you get a subscription to that. Now, the cool thing about Office 365 in Australia and New Zealand is that it's now free for non-for-profits, or heavily discounted if you go for another plan. So that's a donation setup that Microsoft have going. And to find out more about that, there's some information at the end of this slide pack with links, but there's also plenty of information on Connecting Up on the Connecting Up website, because they're a sort of a key partner for Microsoft in that way. So if you're keen on understanding your eligibility, you would go through Connecting Up. And essentially, yeah, it's a secure platform. You need it in the sense that you need a login to get in, and is part of the wider Office 365 suite. So what that means is, from what used to be a server product that was hosted on premises or in a cloud-hosted environment, I suppose, that used to be have its own dedicated server that an organisation needed to manage. It's now just another service that's in the Microsoft Office 365 cloud. That comes along with other services. So what I've got there is not actually even all of them. It includes OneDrive for Business, which I'll go into a little bit later on what that is and the differences. That's one of the complementary systems that I want to touch on later. Office Online, which is those little Word, Excel, PowerPoint. They're the Office products available in the browser for you, so you don't have to have Word or Excel installed on your machines to edit those documents, and to use those functionalities. Although in the cloud it's a little bit less full, a richer experience than it is in the desktop application. Obviously, the other big one is Outlook or email in the cloud. So a lot of the drivers for a lot of businesses to move to Office 365, these we're seeing with our clients, is for email. So Office 365 with Outlook will host your email with a big amount of storage for email, and a lot of organisations are moving to Office 365 for that reason, to have email hosted in the cloud, so that they don't have to manage an Exchange server anymore. So similarly, whereas SharePoint was a server, Exchange was a server and a big overhead for a lot of businesses, and the Office 365 email solution is quite attractive to a lot of non-for-profits. You also get Skype for Business. You also get Yammer Premium, which we'll talk about a little bit later, and a bunch of other applications that are sort of coming on board or new that are sort of part of this suite that I don't have there. Things like Office 365 Video, which is a new sort of YouTube for the enterprise. That's a secure platform for hosting video. They did a big revamp of their video hosting, and that's now available. and other little bits and pieces, things like a new thing called Delve, which is like an intelligent search center. One called Sway, which is like a kind of like a Prezi crossed with a PowerPoint sort of solution for presentation. So they've got a few different applications, and you can incorporate Microsoft Dynamics CRM in your Office 365 subscription, and yeah, so it's supposed to be an all-encompassing platform for the business that Microsoft offers, and you can obviously add on different services to that. But out of the box, in the E1 and E3 plans, you get these all included. So what people would use SharePoint, and also you get SharePoint, you get a whole suite of site collections that is what SharePoint things are called. They're called site and site collections, and that's where you can host your intranets and team documents and team sites. So what you would use it for would be, yeah, an intranet, hosting documents, and spaces for collaborating with teams. That's really what it's used for primarily. So what are some of the drivers for using this platform for organisations? Why would people use it, and what you know, what is it that it offers that other services and other things don't offer? So one of the big reasons why people use an intranet is for communication in your business. So, and sorry, not just communication, but centralised points of truth for your organisation. So I consider that kind of a communications function, which is probably a bit controversial. But to me, being able to say confidently to your staff that this is where the key piece of information, that the point of truth for something is, whether it's an announcement from your boss, whether it's a link to the website, whether it's links to your, you know, to other portal, you know, to a HR portal or to a, you know, client management system that you've got hosted somewhere else, or whatever it is, and you know, key policy documents and key policy forms and things like that. That's what the intranet is. Like, it's a centralised place where businesses can host that sort of information and manage that sort of information instead of scattering it in a lot of different places, and, you know, having it in weird, hard to find places. It can also be a great replacement for a lot of all-staff emails. So, and we'll go into this a little bit later when we talk about Yammer, and we talk about what you can use Yammer for versus SharePoint for. But essentially, you can use SharePoint as a sort of broadcast tool. It has a newsfeed feature. It has discussion boards. It has some sort of social features, which are slowly getting overtaken by Yammer, and if you're looking for a more social platform, that's definitely what I'd recommend you go with, is something like Yammer. But certainly the SharePoint as a platform can definitely have news feeds and updates from the business to staff, and can definitely be seen as a place of, you know, understanding, yeah, what's going on in the business. So like messages from your CEO or your MD or from anyone else, like posting up news from across the business, from people across, you know, across teams, posting information about what's going on at work is a great place, and heavily cuts down, hopefully, on email. Although I will say, you know, all of these things that it can do, I should preface by saying, it can only do if your processes and your communications and your, I guess processes is the right word, support the use of it. So it's one thing to say we're now using SharePoint to post up, you know, news around the business. It's another thing to actually go and do that and get staff to start changing their behaviour, and that's a whole other conversation, and it's a whole other thing to think about in terms of change management and getting people to do it. People can't, but yeah, you can't just implement a new platform and expect people to just use it. That said, people aren't necessarily as averse to change as we often think, and if you do things properly and you introduce things, you know, without a lot of fuss, but really clearly, it doesn't have to be that difficult to get people to start to use something different, especially if they can see the benefits and you explain the benefits of it. that's just my little change management note there. But we'll talk a little bit about that later when we do sort of things to think about when you're implementing, because that's definitely something to consider. Document management. So I'll talk a little bit about this more later. But SharePoint is really, really good at hosting documents in the cloud. So it's got really cool version control features. It's got really cool document locking and check and control features if you're so inclined. If you've had some experience with SharePoint in the past, like really old versions, you're probably used to hearing things like checking in and checking out documents, and document management being a little bit more clunky in a very much more controlled way. That's come a long way in the last couple of versions of the platform, and certainly in the online version. Check-in, check-out is on a team site not even enabled by default. That'd be something you'd want to turn on. These days, SharePoint documents can be edited very easily, quickly, and can even be shared, and can enable co-authoring on documents, which means two people can be in the document at the same time editing it, which is really cool. So it's actually a lot better these days at fostering collaboration on documents, but it still has those document control features that it always had if you want to use it in that way. It's really more about how do you want to configure it, and in what ways do you want to use the documents, and you can have both. So we'll go into a bit more detail on that later, but that's another big thing it would do, and this is another thing which people would talk about. And then team sites are these other big ones. So this idea that teams across the business can have can work on a project together, or can work on in their own departments, areas together, and store all their documents there together, and have things like task calendars, links, and useful tools if they so want. Again, that would need to be used you set up properly for staff, and certain team members would probably need to learn a little bit about how to use SharePoint, although it's not particularly difficult. It would just be a little bit of clicking around and getting the hang of it, and then it can be quite a powerful little tool for collaboration, and that's another thing that it does. So some quick examples. To be clear, I use, and as I sort of said earlier, the focus of today is very much on out-of-the-box functionality. I don't really go into a lot of what can be done with customization. That said, obviously, so what this screenshot shows is a completely vanilla SharePoint site, which doesn't even have a logo attached to it, which would be incredibly easy to do. But essentially, it's a site that has had no customization on it whatsoever, has had no branding on it whatsoever. Literally, just this is the sort of thing that could be shown very quickly and easily out of the box. So it's got a news and announcements feed, some quick links, and an events calendar, a staff directory, policies and procedures along the left, department sites along the top. It's not department sites are what are here over home, and then policies and procedures and training libraries along the left. It's a very, very kind of vanilla standard feature, but this is the sort of thing that you could create very quickly with just using configuration in the browser. To take it to a bit of the next level, you could start to use images more. You can embed video. At the end of the day, SharePoint is just a website. It's just a HTML page. You can edit the page in the browser. You can sort of put in, embed videos, embed images, embed special links just in it without needing to know code, or without needing to know, web development. It lets you do a lot of just basic stuff in the browser. It's just like a website. These things, these like announcements and CEO updates and links, and same as here, other applications, they're what SharePoint calls web parts, and you just put the page into edit mode, and you start installing web parts, and you can start to see you can start to put content in a page that is content from SharePoint. I do have one basic, like this is a screenshot of like a very basically skinned website, SharePoint site where if you do know a bit of code and if you are keen on learning how to apply CSS branding, or if you wanted to hire someone to do this, putting in your own colors, I mean, you can definitely control some colors. SharePoint gives you some control over colors. There's like key sets of color schemes you can choose to apply, which is again all non-codable, just out of the box. But if you wanted to, you could get it customized to your branding, and just get different colors that looking the way you want it to look, and get the web parts skinned like that. Put a particular branding on the menus to make it look a little bit more branded. That's the sort of thing you would do with a bit of branding if you wanted to. Another thing intranets would do that can do is things like forms. Now this is a form that's been customized in a product called Infopass, which is Microsoft's sort of standard form tool. There are other form tools that you can get that are third party that make editing forms really easy and simple, or you can just kind of deal with out-of-the-box forms, which don't give you a lot of customization in the browser, but are just sort of for really basic stuff, which are essentially just lists. In SharePoint, every piece of content is a list or a library. So we've talked a little bit about libraries being document libraries, where you can host documents and store images or files, where the data that is being stored is a file. But then there's another kind of document called lists that are like basic SharePoint. They're basically like an Excel spreadsheet in the browser, like a fancy Excel spreadsheet if you think of them that way. They hold data. They hold columns of data. They call rows of data with columns that have metadata on them. And a form is really just a front end for that. So if you've got experience working with like Google Docs and using like Google Excel spreadsheets and Google Forms, it's very similar. Like you can build a form that is essentially just a front end of a spreadsheet, and it's really not much different here. A form is literally just the entry point for entering a row of data into a spreadsheet, and really building a form is about building a spreadsheet that works for you and that captures the right kind of information in the right form for you. So it's it's a little bit of business analysis skill, but if you've got a lot of businesses have those sort of key sort of Excel spreadsheets that are like heavily used by admin staff to like asset registers or I don't know, travel expense claims and things like that are kind of these like little interim solutions that haven't been given a full system yet. Potentially they're the sort of things that would translate very well into a SharePoint list and could potentially be something that you could manage just in the browser. You can export them to Excel if you wanted to do graphs on them or whatever, but for an end user would make life a lot easier for them if you wanted them to like put in a quick expense claim or put in a quick add something to a register somewhere, or check a database to see if that if something if you've got a library internally, you could list it in a list, that sort of thing. It's really it can be really helpful for that sort of stuff. You just need to be a bit creative and think a little bit about it from a business process perspective. So document management is the sort of thing where this is sort of basic document management in a SharePoint site. It's a library. Everything in SharePoint is either a list or a library, and if it's a library, it holds documents. When it holds documents, you can see there that there's and you can see the documents there with folders, and you can click on that and find out more information, including properties of the document, in which you can see the document's metadata. You can look at version history. You can get the link to that document. You can see who last edited the document and what version it is. This is one of my favorite features of SharePoint, which is version control. So when you go in to see the version history of a document, if you've got this turned on, which by default most of them are from memory, you can see every change that's been made to a document without having to save a new version. So a lot of organisations who are a little bit more advanced in their document management on a file server will probably have some sort of document naming convention slash process in place that they use to manage their documents. So things like, oh, I've created a document, I give it a name, and then I send the link to my colleague, and they save as, and they rename it with a new version number, or with their initials on it, or with a new date, or however they do it, whatever the convention is, and they they have to create copies of a document every time to manage versions. Well, that goes out the window with this sort of system, because instead of having to create new copies and save as all the time, the versions are kept in line with the document and are just part of the document. So whenever you click on it, you're getting the latest version, and they'll open. If you wanted to go back and look at other versions, you'd open up version history of the document, and you'd be able to then see them. And I'm not sure if I don't have it there, but if you hover, see how like those modified dates are blue. If I hovered over that, you could then see like a little, do you want to restore this version, or do you want to delete this version, or do you just want to view an old version? If you wanted to go back and view it, and later on you can just delete the ones you don't want. So it's a really lovely feature. It saves a lot of hassle, and it just makes things a lot easier. The other thing it does is that if you used to have a lot of organisations who use file sharing is very crude, a very crude way of saving documents. Really, when you save a document, you just give it the document a name, and it automatically logs, the last modified date and the person who last modified it. If you're lucky, and if you're lucky, you can display the last modified date in your file, in your file system. What happened there? Oh, what's going on? Sorry about that, guys. I don't know what happened there. What was I saying? Oh, yeah. So the other cool thing about this is that you can use the metadata really smartly on SharePoint document libraries. So when I say metadata, I mean things like the modified by column, the date column, the modified date column, the created by column, the created date column. You can then put custom columns on it to say whether or not this version is a draft, or whether it's a renewed date, or whatever it is. And it's cool, and it captures all of that information and displays all of that information to you very readily and easily. So what used to have to happen with like in the example I used before, when if you're manually saving versions of documents, you might be putting your initials in the version name, in the document name, to track who last edited it. Well, you don't have to do that, because you've got the person who last edited there, because everyone's logged in and the system knows who each person is. So you can be a lot more meaningful with your document names. You can just call the document what it is. You don't have to put in the date. You don't have to put in a version number. You don't have to put in the person's initials. It's all captured for you automatically. So it's a lot smarter and a lot more sophisticated a system in general. Just that in that sense. From a file share. And as you can see also, you can have folders. So a lot of people ask me that, can we have folders in a document library? Yes, you can. So, and most organisations do. So one of the other cool things, and this is one of the harder things to demo, because you kind of need two people in the room or involved. I'm just going to take a quick sip of water. Hang on. One of the cooler things that it does is that if a document is saved, and I'll preface this by saying that unless you're talking about Office 2016 version documents, which or working in Office 2016, which probably a lot of you aren't up to yet, because it kind of just got released. This only works for Word and PowerPoint documents. It doesn't work for Excel. So just as a preface, but for Word documents and PowerPoint documents, this is a really cool feature. if a document is stored on SharePoint, you can then co-author the document. So two people can be in the document at the same time, or more than two. Multiple people can be in a document at the same time, editing it and saving it. So you can be working in a document, and you can sort of see there a little pop-up will come up down the bottom. This screenshot is from Word 2010, but it works obviously in Word 2013 as well. So 2010 up, this will work with. So you'll be working in a document, you'll get a pop-up to say that someone else has entered the document and are working on it. And if you can sort of see there, that she started working on this section of the document, and it grays it out and prevents me from editing it while she's editing it. And vice versa, the part that I'm working on would be grayed out to her. And we'd only see each other's changes once we both, and you can always tell that the SharePoint, that it's saved on SharePoint, because you'll see that little green refresh button over the save button, because what it's doing is saving but also refreshing changes. That's what it means. So every time you click it, your changes will push through and her changes will push through, and you'll be able to see each other's work. It's great because, you know, in the old days on file shares, it was, can you please get out of the document so I can edit it, or can you please, or you having to, you know, open it in read only and save as another version. All of that goes. You can just go in and be in the document and work on the document when you need to. Saves a lot of time, saves a lot of hassle, and again, all of these versions would be saved and automatically kept in the back end with that version control system, so you could then see any prior changes. The other thing that it can do is sync offline. Now, this is something that I say use with caution, because up until this point, the offline sync client is quite buggy, and kind of Microsoft are actually kind of, as we speak, rolling out a new version of this system. And because they are well aware of the limitations and the problems that the old one has caused, and actually we're seeing a lot of issues with the sync clients, like quite recently, because of these changes getting pushed through as they're trying to fix it. So I say use with caution because it can cause a lot of hassle, but essentially on paper, and hopefully definitely within 6 to 12 months this issue will have gone and definitely will be working quite nicely, is that you can take these documents offline. So you can take them onto your local machine, onto your C drive, and sync them down to what is essentially a local, if you've used Google Drive or even the OneDrive, even a OneDrive personal account, like a Microsoft consumer account that you can just, anyone can just go and sign up for, like Google Drive or Dropbox. This is exactly the same. Essentially, what it does is it syncs down a copy to your desktop or to your local machine, and it allows you to access those documents when you're offline. So, like when you're on a plane, or you just happen to not have the internet, and you've got your laptop with you, you can work on the document, and then the next time you connect to the internet, you don't even have to be at the office. You just need to have a working internet connection. Syncing should happen back up to the cloud, and your document should update. I say should because especially when syncing a shared document library that would be on SharePoint, this can cause quite, this has been causing a little issues. It's less problematic with your own personal OneDrive account, which I'll talk about briefly so you understand the difference. But look, I'm really confident because Microsoft have been very open about wanting to fix this and been quite apologetic and have acknowledged the issues with it and have basically redesigned the platform from a ground up for this part of it, the little sync tool. I'm cautiously optimistic that within 6 to 12 months at most, this issue should be fixed, because it's kind of in the midst of getting fixed as we speak. And then this is an example of a team site that I created for a client. This is the sort of thing that it can do really well. Like, you can create a little sub-site that's just for a team, or that is aimed just for a team, and you can have things like project summary and task list. You can have little news feeds. They can have their own document library. They can have a little calendar. They can have their own links. They can have all of the little bits and pieces that a team might want to use and collaborate with, can all sit on a little sub-site underneath an intranet or in another site collection if you prefer, but essentially it can house these little sort of project hubs or team hubs that kind of combine lists and libraries together in a site that teams can use and collaborate on. Quite useful. Things like a little task list, which is what I've got here, where you can like list down all of the different tasks that teams have to do and have a little timeline, and people can tick them off. You can assign them to people that can email you when you've been assigned something, and you can go in and update your progress on it, and work together, and you can flag when something's overdue and that sort of stuff. It's really cool. So this is the sort of thing that again would be out of the box. You just go in and say add new app, add a task list, and through site contents, and just add them and go on with it. And that sort of stuff is the sort of thing that you could definitely just teach yourself using like Microsoft's online help store, for Office 365. It's all of that sort of how to add a new app, how to work with a task list, how to create a calendar, all that sort of stuff. There's a lot of resources online and on SharePoint, on Microsoft's websites, the sort of thing that just, with a bit of practice and a bit of reading up, doesn't take too long to learn, and certainly doesn't require like technical knowledge necessarily. It's really just more about learning how to use almost a web application, a website. Often people who are good at that are, if you've got either obviously an IT person, but apart from that, admin people are often good people to train up for that sort of thing. And also I would say anyone who works in sort of a digital team, so like if you've got if your comms team has, someone who manages a website, there's really, if they can manage a WordPress site, for example, or, they know how to add a widget to a site from Twitter or something like that. If they have any sort of basic HTML skills or something like that, which is something that a lot more organisations, people in those sorts of teams are starting to have. This sort of thing should be quite easy for them to learn. It's certainly not prohibitive. Okay, moving on. It always flies at this stage. Okay, so look, I've only touched on the sorts of things it can do. As I sort of said at the beginning, there's a lot. There's a lot this platform can do. I've touched on the big points. Definitely document libraries, team sites, and using lists and things like that are really one of the big drivers for why smaller organisations move to this sort of platform. One of the things I want to quickly talk about is the differences between, so what you would use SharePoint for versus what you would use something like OneDrive for Business for, because this is something that organisations I've noticed can get confused about, and it is a little bit confusing. So first of all, just to be clear, you get a full, this is what I said before, and you get a whole suite of apps when you get on Office 365, and you'll always see it in this little app, this little top left little menu that is there across all Office 365 sites. It's what's called an app launcher, and you can then get to all sorts of things. You can get to your Outlook, you can get to your own personal calendar, you can get to Yammer, and then you can see there OneDrive and sites. And OneDrive is your own personal account for storage of documents. So for OneDrive for Business. So when a user is set up in Office 365 and they log in with often their email address and their account, they have their email, they have all of their other accounts, they have access to SharePoint, and they have their OneDrive. This is like a lot of organisations on a file share might have sort of a shared drive and then people's like home drive or people's personal drives that are like not necessarily the same as their local machine, but the business is set up with their own place to store their own documents. That's the best analogy I can make for OneDrive. It's everyone's personal account, and everyone has 1 terabyte worth of storage just for them, that by default the documents that you store in OneDrive are only visible to you as a user. Now, why Microsoft have given each individual user 1 terabyte of storage for work is, I think, amazing. Like, I have no idea why at work you would store so much on your own personal account. A sophisticated or mature organisation should be asking their staff to share on, if it's related to work, to store it on a shared area. I mean, I use my OneDrive for Business, but I use it for my own personal work stuff, like expense claim forms or professional development stuff, or stuff that I just want to share with my boss. So I can have a folder in my OneDrive for Business that it's, say, professional development or performance management, or whatever it is that I work on with my boss, and I just want he or she to see that. Then I could have a folder there that I share with them, and that's where we can have those documents shared together. And that's great. That's what OneDrive for Business would be great for. What I wouldn't put in that would be something like, project work that I'm working on with my colleagues, and that isn't really my work. It's the business's work, and there should be a spot in a shared location for that. And that's what SharePoint Online would do with document libraries and sites. And we'll go into a little bit about how you'd set that up. But I guess that's the big difference. And the other thing just to remember is that, like, OneDrive for Business is, yes, it's my storage area, but I don't personally own it. The business the OneDrive for Business account that is owned and managed by my employer owns it. And so when and if I leave, and my account gets disabled, or the login gets changed so I can no longer get into it because I don't work there anymore, I'd no longer have access to that stuff. Because it's not controlled by me. It's not a personal account. So that's just to be clear on what the difference is. So OneDrive is 1 terabyte per user for free. It's not expandable, and every file is owned by the user, and is not intended for sharing. Well, it can be shared, but that's up to the individual to share things. It's not managed centrally. SharePoint Online is managed centrally by the IT team or the business process manager who owns that. In the entire tenant, in Office 365 tenant, you get 10 gigabyte plus 0.5 gigabyte per license for total for SharePoint storage. But so that might not be enough for you to consider, potentially with the amount of data you might want to migrate to the cloud. But it is expandable. I think the last time I checked it was $3 per gig per year, but don't quote me on that because it changes sometimes, which isn't too bad. So if you wanted an extra sort of 100 gigabytes for the year, it'd be $300 per year to add that. And that's the thing, it's managed centrally. Both can be used, can be synced offline with that client I was talking to you about. And kind of what I was saying before, the OneDrive for Business syncing is much less problematic because it's just you getting your documents down. You're not syncing a library that is synced by a lot of other people. You can't sync someone else's OneDrive. You can sync your own, and you can sync document libraries. But and so the OneDrive for Business library that you sync down often isn't too problematic because it's just you. Yammer was bought by Microsoft. I have to check my notes when it was. It was a few years ago now. Hang on, let me just see if I've got it. It started in 2008, and Microsoft acquired it in 2012. And really, it's just so much like Facebook. It's changed. When it first started, it was essentially a Facebook ripoff. Like, it was really, really similar to Facebook. It's evolved a little bit since then. It's now very much structured around groups. In Yammer, there's you can create and join lots of different groups and have them as either sort of private groups. I mean, Facebook has this as well, private groups or public groups that you can join and share information across them. There can be announcements up the top that are, sort of from the business to sort of pin them at the top of things so people can see them. But obviously it's a lot more social. There's commenting, there's likes, there's private messaging. There's even a little chat window that you've got there. It's Yammer is is becoming the primary social platform for businesses. So if lowering email traffic is a big one for you, if connecting people across different offices is a big one for you, if being a bit more transparent in your operations is a big one for you and your organisation, I start to say to clients that perhaps SharePoint isn't quite the right platform for them. Perhaps they should look closer at Yammer. It's incredibly easy to set up. In fact, it's almost too easy. Like, you just log in, and if you're an admin, you get to just start creating groups, and it's all sort of there for you. All you really need to do is set up groups and put up a network usage policy, and kind of off you go. It's really not technical at all. It is like setting up a Facebook environment, very much geared towards end users, and certainly not an IT thing. So you really need to think about what's driving you to think about a platform like SharePoint or Yammer, and to really weigh up what it is that's important for you. Because if it's this sort of thing, and the other thing is Yammer's got an app, like a native iPhone app that's really good, or Android, that again, people can just sort of be on the road and post things like that. If that's the sort of thing you want, this is the platform that would be better for you. No question. SharePoint does, like I said, have news feeds, and so definitely some like sort of communication capabilities, but it's nowhere near as sophisticated or as social as this. So it really depends on how you want to do it. And Microsoft are absolutely, they've made no qualms about that. That's why they bought Yammer, was to sort of balance out SharePoint in that way. You can embed this is our Infoxchange front page of SharePoint, and we've just got like a news feed on the front page and some links and things like that. But you can embed a Yammer feed on the front, so you can sort of integrate them a little bit. But essentially, that's just a little frame, like that's just a feed of Yammer. It's not Yammer. It's literally just linking through to it, which you can have there if you wanted, or you could just have it separate. So in the last few minutes, I just want to quickly go over what to do, what to think about. If you're still keen on SharePoint, if you can still see a lot of benefits for your organisation, what are the sorts of things that I recommend you think about it? And it's really four big points that I like to make. One is about strategy, one about implementation, one about design, and finally one about governance. And I'll just quickly touch on them, and then we'll be done for questions. So first of all, you really need to have a really clear vision on what you're doing this for. Kind of flowing on from the Yammer conversation is an intranet the best tool to solve your problem? Like, what are your problems that you're trying to solve? And is an intranet the best tool to solve that problem? And then, the next sort of question is, what are you ready then for working and communicating in a different way, culturally, but also technically? A big thing to consider, which I probably should put on this slide, is something, or maybe another slide, is like, do you have the internet bandwidth at your organisation to be, like, this is all predicated on you having pretty stable internet at your organisation. So if you've got patchy internet or a really slow internet connection, like, I would almost, like, that's a priority to fix first before you start moving. This is all cloud-based. The whole point is that you don't need to host things locally. You just connect to the cloud and log in through a browser, and that means that you need to have good internet connection. So they're the sorts of things you just need to think about. Really just get the base done and make sure you're ready. But also culturally, are people ready to change? These systems do pose big changes to the way people work, but often it makes sense. Like, it's also about size. Like, if you've hit about 25, 30 people, I reckon that's often the tipping point where people start to go, I don't know. I mean, I shouldn't say that, because it really does depend on the organisation. But there's often that sort of size question of, I mean, when you're 10 people and you're all sitting around an office, you don't really need an intranet because you all talk to each other all the time. You don't really need Yammer because you all talk to each other all the time, right? Scale is a big part of it, and needing to connect over distances or different teams, or just different ways of working and people working like in different places, and just bigger amounts of people to deal with, that's when these sorts of drivers come into it. And if your organisation has been struggling for the past year to get communications together because you've grown really quickly and people are a bit frazzled, well, that's a good driver for something like this. But potentially you're not there yet. Who knows? But I guess you just really need to be able to clearly articulate what the purpose is. Then, of course, you need to think about, how you're going to do it. So, do you have the capability and capacity to implement SharePoint in your organisation? Perhaps you need an external partner to help. And then almost more importantly, or definitely very importantly, who will manage it ongoing? So many times organisations go, yeah, we'll just implement a new system. And they think that just by building it and leaving it, that it's fixed. And often that causes more problems than it's worth. Any system needs to be maintained. Any system needs to be made sure that it's kept up to date and kept relevant for workers. If you build an intranet, for your business in a year, and then you grow a lot, and suddenly the MD wants to have 2 more new departments and hire 4 more people to do those 2 new departments, well, then they're going to need their own site, and you're going to need to build them. So you're going to need to have someone to maintain it and keep it up to date, not just at a micro level, at a more macro level for your organisation. Speaking of design and build, this is the sort of thing you would do before you implement, which is, on paper, figure out what it is you need the sites to be like from a structural point of view. So you'll have your intranet hop site, your home page where people kind of is their landing page, but then you're going to have sites for your teams and sites for how you work. And there's a reason why this looks just like a org chart, and that's because it's there supposed to reflect and support your organisation. And if that's how teams work, then that's how teams work. But potentially, instead of having, like there, we've got a program site where each program has its own library or site, and then there's no place for the programs team because everyone works on different programs. So instead of having a programs team site, you just created like sort of one general, well, I guess you do have a programs team site, but it's divided by program, not by sort of, hierarchy of this is where the managers are, this is where the coordinators are, sort of thing. It's information architecture essentially, and you just need to do it before you start, because again, so many businesses just jump into building without even thinking about this at all, really, and it really requires at least a sort of short workshop with people just to make sure you're clear on what it is you need it to look like. And then finally, going forward, what are the sorts of governance permissions that you need to enable? This is all sort of stuff that you'd need to research and figure out what you wanted to do with it. But essentially, SharePoint can be very, very customizable in terms of access, and you need to think about who can access what needs to be locked down. Obviously, there's some content in an organisation that can't be accessible to everyone, but remember that by default these systems are built to be shared and are built to be open to an extent, and sometimes that can pose a really big cultural change for some organisations where people are quite protective of their own work for no real reason except that they're protective of their work. And they're the sorts of, that's what I meant by sort of, are you culturally ready to think about working in a different way? But obviously, are you ready to also lock things down when they're necessary for, for certain types of content? Obviously, HR, finance content, some client content, should be kept, to just certain teams, and that's fine. You just need to map that out and know what you've got to do. So define its purpose. Think about your current information architecture and in your systems and make it work, make the new world work for you. Assign people to lead and own the project, and think about the cultural impact of the project on you. They're the big things that I would take away if you're still thinking about implementing SharePoint. Okay, I've flown through, got 5 minutes for questions, and finished a little earlier, which is good.
Great, thanks Stephanie. We've got a few questions that have come through. So we've got one from
Great.
Alexis with regard to SharePoint, and just wondering, can you save the same documents, not a copy of itself, but the same document in two different folders, and then will it sync if when changes are made?
No, if you've made when you say save to different, you can copy a file to a different location. There's a command to do that in the document library. There's a little command that, if you go to the menu, it says copy, and you can send a copy somewhere. But I don't think, in terms of the syncing and the changing, that what you're doing then is essentially making a copy, and you are separating it from that original file. And therefore, when you edit that original file, you're still just going to be editing that original file, and the copy will remain separate. So no, I think it acts like a copy, like a normal copy.
Thanks for that clarification.
Hope that makes sense.
Next question is from Avi with regard to Yammer. And so when you use Yammer, when do you use Yammer as opposed to Link or Skype for Business?
Oh, good question. Look, Skype for Business is, I kind of didn't touch on that today, but Skype for Business is a, obviously Skype for Business. It's Skype, but you get the account as part of Office. You can use your Office 365 account in Skype for Business. Look, Yammer's little chat window kind of is just that. It's just like a little Facebook chat window. It's not like a full-on proper chat client. Skype for Business is a proper IM client. You can have multiple people in an IM chat. Then you can switch very quickly to making it a video call or a Skype call. So I would probably use Skype over using a video chat sort of thing. But Skype it's Skype, so it's instant messaging and video conferencing and audio IP audio calls. So it's fantastic for bigger organisations that are starting to lose contact. Again, really helps with cutting down on email. Instead of sending some quick short email going, hey, you at your desk or whatever, you can just quickly IM someone. Skype for Business is a really fantastic tool. And I guess, you would use it for more immediate conversations that you want to do either with IM or with video conferencing.
Great, thanks, Stephanie. I've got a couple more questions with regard to Yammer. These ones are from Shannon, who asks, is Yammer for internal clients only, or can it be shared with external clients also? For example, inviting guest contributors from outside of the organisation.
Good question. So what you can do, I know you can definitely, you might be better to also just Google this question, but from my understanding, you can definitely have these things called external networks where you can create sort of like these overlapping networks. So if you've got a client, if you've got another partner who have their own Yammer, you can certainly kind of Venn diagram, the two networks together and have sort of a shared network space where two people who have existing Yammer logins can have a shared network, and they're called external networks in Yammer, and they work really well, and that's what a lot of bigger Yammer communities are based on. Like, there's an Office 365 Yammer community, for example, where it's just one big external network, and all these other people from around the world, because they've got their own Yammer accounts, are allowed to log into it. So if the existing person has their own Yammer account, absolutely. If they just have like a guest, from memory, no, like that's not supported, but that was a little while ago since I checked that, and maybe something's changed. They're always updating these things. I would take that one to Google. That would be an easy one to figure out whether or not you can just like log in with a guest account. Good question. Sorry, I'm not sure off the top of my head about that one.
Thanks, Stephanie. We've got another question from Shannon, who asks, can Microsoft offer user training for new admin staff?
I'm not sure. Yeah, I think there are definitely. Well, there's the Microsoft Partner Network. When you log into Office 365 Admin Portal, there's a whole help section there which has a lot of, you can log tickets and get someone from Microsoft to contact you if you've got a particular issue, but there's also plenty of resources there that are like sort of just online help resources. In terms of sort of courses, there's definitely the partner network that you can sort of sign up to, and I think, I can't remember for Office 365 whether you'd need to pay for a membership to that, but certainly the partner network has a lot of courses and sort of video webinars and things like that for admins starting out. So yes, they do offer that sort of stuff. Whether or not it's free, I couldn't tell you. I would start by looking in the admin portal.
Thanks, Stephanie. Our next question is from Avi, who asks, how do you back up your SharePoint libraries or documents?
Well, good question, Avi. Typically, you don't. You rely on Microsoft's SLA to do that for you. So, all of your data is being stored in if you're an Australian client, and it's a new tenant, then it's definitely being stored in Australia. If you're an older tenant, it's either migrated recently or is on the path to migration to the Australian data centre. So anything deleted from SharePoint sites are stored locally for 90 days in the SharePoint recycle bin. They're then taken out of that, but they're stored for another 90 days in Microsoft's backup, which you can access with a request to them. There are third-party backup tools. You need to do a bit of research on that. If you're not, if you want another layer of support and protection, you can do a bit of Googling and see for Office 365 SharePoint backups, and that would take snapshots from your data and put them on some sort of local storage if you'd like. But obviously that costs a little bit of money, and would also come to a download limit. Would affect your downloading for your internet, because you'd be taking copies offline. But yeah, look. It's not something that comes up very often. A lot of our clients, the whole reason why they go with this is because they don't have to do that anymore, because they are entering a contract with Microsoft and they're satisfied with that.
Great, thanks, Stephanie. Next question is from Alexis, who asks, you may have touched on it briefly before, but are you able to perhaps talk a little bit more about the workflow capabilities of SharePoint?
Yes, I can say that out of the box, workflows are quite limited. They definitely require a little bit more business knowledge and a bit more sort of kind of technical business analysis knowledge. To do a kind of good workflow, you'd use a tool called SharePoint Designer, which you can get from Microsoft, which is like a little application that you can connect and do certain things to the site from sort of another portal. They can do things like kind of basic approval workflows and sort of a bit more sort of complicated sort of alerts. Someone adds something, you get an alert to you. Some of that stuff out of the box, you can just set up alerts for lists and things like that. That's not technically a workflow, it's more just an alert to you, like an email alert. So look, they're a little bit harder to implement out of the box. If you're really serious about workflows, I would consider looking at a third-party add-on tool, only because they offer a lot more functionality. Like, you can do so much more with them, and they're incredibly easier to use than SharePoint Designer. Like, they're all in-browser drag drop. I'm thinking something like Nintex, or I think it's called K2, but that said, they're not cheap. So it's a trade-off, but as to what it is that you want to get. They're incredibly powerful and really lovely tools to use, but they're expensive.
Great, thanks, Stephanie. I've had another question come through about SharePoint, and is it possible to search a document by its content? And if yes, does it also work for scanned documents?
First part of the question, yes. The search works the search works really well and will search internally. Scan documents, I would say no.
No problem.
Because it's, yeah, that's it.
I think actually, and that seems to be the questions that have come through so far. We haven't had any more come through in the last few minutes. So is there any other topics that you wanted to cover, or are you happy to wrap things up for this evening today?
That's all. No, just thank you everyone for listening, and I hope this was useful for you. And look, you can get through to us by Infoxchange or through for Connecting Up. Connecting Up hosts a lot more sessions like this. I'm sure they've got other ones that are more broadly about Office 365 implementation, so and things like looking at email. So if you're curious as to the other parts of Office 365. They'll have ones coming up, and I also do, I think in March I have another one coming up which is a more deep dive 3 sessions, 2 hours each, where we go into sort of a bit more do-it-yourself, where I get a lot more hands-on, go into demos a bit more and show users how to sort of set up a site collection, how to build a site and that sort of stuff. So if you're really keen, look out for that one in the new year.
Great, thank you Stephanie for presenting today, and thank you everyone for joining also. A link to the recording of the webinar as well as a copy of the slides will be sent to you all, so please keep a lookout, and if you have any further questions feel free to send them through to events@connectingup.org. As always, don't forget to check out our website, newsletters, Facebook and Twitter for upcoming events and other information. Thanks again and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks all.